Hey, everybody, and thanks for being here. We are doing another live product preview for our company, Community Boss. We have three different solutions that center around parking, amenities, and mapping. Today, we're going to really focus on parking, but an attribute of parking, and specifically for the HOA world. So, Parking Boss is our parking solution, and we have the ability to generate revenue through your parking lot. But I want to, before everybody gets freaked out about that, just want to point out a few things when it comes to parking and some of the things that may be coming to mind immediately, which is, well, overcharging, um, making people uncomfortable when it comes to the residents that live there, owners, all the things. At the end of the day, the whole point of our solution is to create fairness and bring peace to your parking lot. And so paid parking is a way that can even help enhance that motivation. But also, we all know in the HOA world, there's things you got to pay for, whether that's your parking lot or residing the buildings or whatever it is. And that takes money and that takes dues a lot of times. But sometimes that means special assessments or reserve funds or whatever it is, how you're going to pay for it. One way or another, it has to happen. Otherwise, your buildings and parking lots and everything else decline. And then the value of your own place where you live and bought also decline in value. So we want to be a helper when it comes to maybe offsetting having to charge extra for things and things of that nature. And so we really want to dive into and dispel some of the maybe hesitancies around the ability to charge for parking, specifically in the HOA world. So today, I'm Evan. I'm here to be a guide. Nathan Northey, he is our director of sales for HOA as well. And in the HOA world, for our product mix, parking is a biggie. Guest parking, a huge deal, a main reason why people come to us because they need help. And so, Nathan, what are some things that you hear when it comes to paid parking specifically that can be hesitancies, and have some people have a hard time getting past, but you can help people feel a little more at ease.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a very sensitive subject.
Totally.
You know, talking to a board and talking about different ways or different tools that we could bring to the table to help make things fair. I think it's all about how, one, we talk to our customers about it, because if I were to just say, hey, I'm going to charge all your guests, that's definitely going to scare everyone away, and rightfully so. Um,
Right.
Certain communities, maybe they're more of a vacation resort style communities where parking and charging for parking at that community that's right next to Disneyland, that could be a normal thing. So that might not be all that
Mm-hmm.
scary. But for most HOAs, that the term of just paid guest parking usually scares people a lot. So typically what I do is I kind of do a quick layout of like what our normal tools are, how we would fix this, which is typically putting in really good rules, which we talked about last week, right? Like have good rules, limit the amount of time a guest can stay on the property, either by the car, limit a home's ability to have a certain number of either guests at a time or just an overall certain number of days. So my home, I only get 10 visitors of parking passes, if you will, per month, right? So a rule like that. So instead of just focusing on collecting payments of parking, I kind of lay out what good ideas are. Have a good, either a per home time limit or have a per car time limit. And then if someone were to go beyond that limit, what normally would happen is our software would give them an X or say like, you've used up all your time. So I think instead of just jumping to paid parking, I say as an alternative, what we could do is say, hey, you've used up all of your free time. Now it's
Mm.
going to be $5 per day. or $10 a day or $1 an hour or whatever the HOA wants to set it up as. And we can kind of use that as an alternative to, like, if I used up all my time, I now have to call property management, or now I have to reach out to this general board email and try and get an additional pass. We could just automate that. We could just automate the system to say, you've used up all your time. Now it's going to have a charge. And those charges, the only time and reason we're charging people are for people that are staying longer than what your normal day-to-day rules call for. So it is a high emphasis of, like, we're trying to just make this fair. If someone's, and we're approaching the holiday season, so it's definitely a topic a lot of people are bringing up. If someone's relatives are in town for 2 weeks, but your normal HOA rules call for 10 days each home, then that relative could just pay for those additional 4 days in the system really easily on their own. And the other part of it too is we're not trying to bankrupt any of your guests or your residents.
Right.
We're not charging, for most communities, it's not $100 charge for a day or two more. It's usually really simple, and it's not that expensive, but it's you want to set the price to where not everyone's going to want to just park out there and use up all their time every month. You kind of want it to have a little bit of a, okay, I have to pay for parking now kind of feeling to it, but we can still set an overall limit. So I always like to state that it's not just I pay $5 a day for the rest of the month and I can just, keep parking my resident vehicle out there. We can still put in that limit of, hey, you can park up to 15 days with payments on the last 5 days, but you can't park more than a total of 15 days. We can still put in those safety nets to help make sure people aren't cheating the system.
Right. And what are some scenarios that have been, I guess, successful? Because obviously there's certain communities that this could be a really good fit for, and there's others that maybe it's not. And, we try to be transparent about that because we don't want to set you up thinking, oh my gosh, you guys are going to just do great at this, and then it not actually pan out.
Yeah, I think the communities it typically does. So there's a lot of that goes into, like, making an assumption of how much we're going to make, because the community with 200 homes and 15 guest spots in the Bay Area is going to have a lot higher demand than that community out in rural Ohio where they have 20 homes and 200 spots. So the demand for those spots are a lot higher. So typically price also increases for higher demand. But again, that's something your board can typically decide on your own. And then typically, it just depends on kind of your home to space ratio. If that's really tight, you might want to have the free time not be, too generous, because the goal with guest spots is I don't want them filled up all the time. Then we have to kind of manage that well. So you might want to start off a little more strict with free time and then have the option for pay to park time. It's also just really hard to tell if people are going to end up doing that, or if like, I'm thinking of a community where they have 4-car driveways and 2-car garages. Like, that's 6 cars. So if people actually just realize I'm limited on guest parking and they start parking in their driveways, it's kind of a win for the community because now we've cleaned up a lot of the streets. But it's also not necessarily a win in increased revenue with parking, because now the parking is actually used what it's supposed to be used for, which is guests. So it can really vary. But the communities that do, like, honestly the best at it are the ones that have a smaller range of free time, 5 to 7 days or 100 hours of free time, and then have a charge either per hour or per day of parking. And then we could, like I said, set that up, and then that revenue kind of just gets put into an account for the HOA. But those, the ones with,
Right.
it's just going to depend on the demand really of the HOA.
Yeah. And there's definitely different thresholds when it comes to, okay, you've made X and this will help you save for resurfacing the parking lot. Or it might be that all it will do is really help you to pay for things like enforcement, pay for different softwares you're using, such as ours.
Right.
And that in and of itself could be a benefit, obviously, because then when you have a net zero increase, right? Like, you don't have to worry about increasing dues, or
Right.
things like that when it comes to software or even enforcement for that matter.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, yeah, a lot of communities do self-enforcement, but some choose to use an outside patrol company or enforcement company. You know, that can be more successful if you have a really big problem,
Mhm.
and you need some to really enforce those rules and give. But at the end of the day, like a helper is just another way that it can be either just paying for itself, or maybe you make a little extra and benefiting the community.
Yeah.
One thing that we didn't really like highlight is just the vacation aspect. So I
Mhm.
know that some of the communities that are HOA that we have are heavily like short-term rental, kind of a mix between people that live there and um, rent out their unit and both, right? Like they live there sometimes and then they rent it out the rest of the time. Especially in like Florida or vacation hotspots. We know
Mhm.
that we've seen those particular communities do really well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. When we first started Parking Boss, we didn't set out to like solve certain issues, but our software kind of in and of itself naturally does. So, I mean, for
Right.
example, 10 years ago, for a lot of HOAs, it wasn't okay to have short-term rentals. And what was cool was our software could easily help identify like that's a short-term rental. So if that is
Yeah.
particular issues in HOAs, it's cool that the software just naturally does that. We weren't setting out to fix that particular issue, but it just naturally does. And as the years have gone on and short-term rentals have grown in popularity, there's a lot more HOAs that are okay with short-term rentals, but the issues that those can still bring can definitely still be headaches. One person renting a two-bedroom condo and bringing six cars, and um, you know, you know, getting parking passes for those six cars. Are they allowed to technically have six cars? Should the first two cars park in the upper lot and all the extras go down to an extra lot? What's cool is our
Yeah.
software can kind of help limit those things. But that's also a growing part of our business for sure. Just because it's such a headache, and with so many different rental entities and management companies, all at one property, it can certainly be a huge headache to try and go like, are we giving out physical passes? Are our cleaners doing that? Is that up to each unit? Or do we have any standardization? And so that's what we can do, is kind of come in and provide that, like, here's the line, here's what your parking passes look like. You hop online, you get them, and just clear up a lot of that, like what you said, is confusion. Just make it really
Right.
simple for your guests instead.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Have a
yeah,
guest pay for their parking. They know their car's not going to get towed. So that's good.
yeah, yeah, totally. Not a fun part of your vacation to go back out to your rental car and see it's gone and go,
Not so
"Wh-
much.
what happened?"
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can see a lot of value there. And there is some companies that have latched onto it and really done well for them for the vacation aspect and making revenue through parking, but also now just having a system that's a consistent system across the whole community.
And I've had some, short-term rental communities where they're staffing someone. They're staffing 2 or 3 different front desk
Right.
people salaries for what? To give out parking passes. And so,
Yeah.
if you can kind of automate that, think of how much money you could save,
Right.
by putting that system in. And you could cut, you don't necessarily have to let go your whole front desk staff, but like if we could like maybe not require them to be on site 24/7, or if we can go to a team of 3 down to a team of 1, like, that could be certainly a win-win depending on the association.
Yeah, and then they still have somebody walking around checking cars, making sure that they're supposed to be there and stuff like that. But if nothing else, it's paying for that person and probably a
Right.
little more. So
Yeah. I mean, I had a property where they had projections of what they have been making by doing this all manually, and they went digital, and they're making more money going digital just because anyone at any time can get their parking pass. I don't have
right,
to wait for a front desk person where I might have lost a night of parking if I was charging a nightly rate. And it's that much more accessible, which means they're getting more passes, which is also just incredible. It's awesome.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
obviously, whenever I talk to a community about, collecting funds, I always say the first goal, like let's make a chart. Like the first goal, let's have it cover this product, right? Like what can we do to help have this set up to where there's no additional cost for Community Boss? That's relatively pretty easy. um, the second line would be like, well, can we raise some funds to go towards the patrol? Or maybe that's additional patrol. Maybe we only have, 1 to 4 nights a week of one random patrol. Maybe the 2 nights a week isn't necessarily enough. Maybe people are kind of breaking the rules in between each of those nights. Maybe you could increase that with additional funds that were collected from those who just stayed longer. And then, then it's just on to more things like you were talking about, restriping the parking lot, or maybe it's those leaking roofs that we're going to have to replace, or we're just building up the reserves because everything else in this world these days is costing more and more and more money. Projections from last year are vastly different from next year's budget. So having the ability to kind of have a regular stream of revenue is a great tool to be able to have.
Absolutely.
And then I don't think we talked about this a whole lot, but then there's also other avenues outside of just paid guest parking. There's also a lot of HOAs that will use our permits as, the HOA approved third car, and that third car is supposed to park in that lower level parking lot. Or that third car is allowed to be parked out on the street if you have an HOA with, single family homes or townhomes, and that's normally where guests park. But that's a honestly somewhat of a more just consistent way to have revenue, because you could say we're going to have up to 30 cars permitted as an HOA approved additional car, and we're charging $50 a month for that. Then if you have a list of 50 cars and they're constantly paying $50 a month, that's really consistent revenue for you. And then you build a waiting list after that. So if that person moves out, you get the next person in. And so there's just some really great ways to be able to, because is it fair for everyone to have an HOA approved third car? If you do, you're probably going to run out of guest parking real quick. So it's a great way to just, have that exception available, and allow for some people that have that college student living at home still, or whatever the case may be. But then also keeping a cap on it to where not everyone is going to have that third or fourth or fifth car. And obviously that's usually why we have problems when it comes to HOA parking.
Right. And you guys even suggest using one of our decals on that third car that's a unique one, calls it out. So it's pretty obvious. Okay, in that parking lot, these cars are the extra cars. And if they have a decal, they're good to be there. If they don't, now we should check it to make sure.
Exactly. Yes. Our decals have unique QR codes and permit numbers that are associated to that specific license plate, that make, model, color of car, and then are tied to that specific home. So they're nearly impossible to copy, because if I just copied one from a Prius and put it on my Ford F-150, right, it's going to obviously not match up in that system, and the license plates won't match. But then it's nice because, one, our permits are usually a free part of the program, so there's no cost involved in that. And two, it's just a great indicator for patrol. I can visually look at that car and know that that car is probably allowed to be here. And then three, they come in up to 6 different colors for free. So, do red this year, and then when we swap out for the next people on the waiting list, we'll go to yellow next year, and we'll go to green, and so on and so on. And it just makes it easy to spot that car has one of the old colors. What is that still doing here? Are they trying to sneak and cheat the system, or are they someone who used to live here and now they're registered as a guest? I can easily check with our system. So
Absolutely.
Great way to meet them. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is just an example, like some signage on the graphic here of what you might put up at your community when it comes to paid parking. The QR code gives somebody access to be able to register the vehicle and pay for the parking, or just register, and then if they're obviously there for the extra few days, then it would kick in. But the signage would let them know that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and you might not want to spell out all the details on the sign, because then if we change our rules, we don't have to change all the signs.
Right.
But you could, if you've had the same rules for a decade and we're not interested in ever changing them, then yeah, we could just kind of spell them all out like you see there. But I often tell people, like, just say there's going to be paid parking, and then you guys can change the rules whenever you want, and then we'll just change that information in the software. But yeah, signage
but
makes it really clear. Yeah.
Right, because obviously a big key to this is good communication, signage, make sure you're emailing and flyering and however would make sense for your community to let people know what the clear guidelines are when it comes to the parking and the paid aspect so that they, aren't caught off guard. I'm sure there's still going to be that one or two people that never read anything, but
yeah,
shame on them.
Totally. And we do help create documentation as well. So if the board wanted to mail out or post little flyers up around the mailboxes, like, hey, here's the new parking program. It's going to go into effect this date. This is what the rules are. This is what it looks like as of now. We help provide all that so that hopefully, cross our fingers, knock on wood, most people will have an understanding of what's to come, and there's less people but you're right. There's always that one or two residents that are like, I never got anything. What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Oh, you didn't get the email and the flyer and the
totally. I'm a little guilty of that myself, not gonna lie, but
yeah. Oh, it's another flyer.
Yeah.
And then we've touched on a lot of this, offering the complimentary time before charging. We have great flexibility in our software to set any kind of rules you want, really. So when it comes to the parking, paid or unpaid, like certain times of the day, overnight, whatever it is you want to do, we can handle it. So, and honestly, I think that to a degree sets us apart from a lot of our competitors. They don't have nearly the flexibility as our metering system.
True.
So,
yeah, I have communities where they charge, $1 an hour during the day, and it's a set rate at night, or maybe it's $2 an hour at night when there's more demand. We've got so much flexibility. Now, I do have to just say, sometimes people have rules that maybe should be changed that we'll really recommend, like, hey, just because we can do this doesn't necessarily mean it's clear or fair. But for the most part, most people are pretty reasonable when it comes to rules, and give out a certain amount of time for free and then charge, or charge less when it's less in demand, and then charge more for those more primo times, like overnight parking and things like that, or dinner time when most people have guests over.
Right. And then the last thing that I thought we might hit on is just the paid violation aspect. Enforcement, fines, and things of that nature. What is it that we can do for an HOA when it comes to that?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on how the HOA is set up and how it's being enforced. Some communities, we don't love the idea of having your towing company be the one checking your parking. Typically they want to tow right away, and in a lot of states it's technically not legal for them to be checking the guest parking and towing. They can usually check fire lanes, entrances, exits, things like that. So it's not legal everywhere. It's not usually recommended because, and the other part of it, just from an HOA standpoint, they're usually wanting to tow right away. If someone makes one honest mistake, boom, you're towed. And we just don't really see that as fair. So the way we have our paid violations set up, and what we really preach and what we recommend is, give a certain number of warnings before we tow a car. And for a lot of communities, before we even offered paid violations, I would always say I like the old baseball strike 1, 2, and 3, you're out method. I think it's just really easy. It's giving a couple of times for people to make an honest mistake, but it's going to catch the people who are breaking your rules over and over and over again. So I like that flexibility. And then what we've done when we kind of rolled out these different payment options is we rolled that into the violation arena, because what we found were there's these HOAs that were like, hey, these towing companies are towing cars and they're making all the money on that tow, and we're not getting anything, And so what we kind of came up with was like, hey, let's create an avenue where, again, we're not trying to bankrupt people for most of our communities. What if instead, like we did, the first warning was free and the second violation had a $25 fine associated to it, and then the third one had a $75, and then if you broke the rule a fourth time, then you'd get towed. And we can put those rules in for you as well. My other favorite part, that's all automated for you. So your patroller or the person checking, if it's a board member or parking committee, they don't have to like go into some spreadsheet and see how many warnings that license plate had. The software is going to do it for them. Hey, this is a fine. This is the first fine. This is the second fine. Time to call for a tow. Super easy. So I love that part of the software. But and then that's just additional revenue that the community could have. That instead of just giving blank warnings out, like there's a little bit of weight to this now. Like I owe $25. I mean, I got a parking ticket last week myself for not putting quotes in the meter. So, and it's like, oh, that hurts a little, but I know I'm not going to try to do that again. And the other cool part of it is we can automatically block them from parking in guest parking next time if they still owe us that $25 fine. So there is a little bit more weight to it. So if they try to register license plate ABC123, but that license plate has a violation on it and it owes the community $25. If they try to register in the future, we can say, actually, you owe us this fee here. Pay with credit card, debit card, Apple Pay, Google Pay, however you want to. But here's how you can kind of take care of that. So, and then if they ignore that, you guys can obviously tow them. But really cool stuff. Really cool. And it's, again, that might not be the most consistent way to generate revenue, but it's just another avenue. It's just one more to be able to, with the cost of everything in your association going up, the lawn care to the general building maintenance to your employees to everything, insurance, and insurance is a huge one. Everything's going up in price. This is just one more avenue to be able to kind of get some money without having to call on a special assessment from all your residents, which I'm assuming most HOAs go up and up and up with that. So this is a way to hopefully help cool that off a little bit and generate some revenue and throw it to all those other increases.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Nathan, for being here today to speak to our HOA friends out there. And if there's any way that we can be a help to you guys, we'd love to answer any more questions you have. You can get to us on our website, communityboss.com. You can call us. You can email Nathan directly or myself. But if you have HOA questions, get a hold of Nathan.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Evan. Great chatting with you.
Yep. No problem. All right. Thanks, guys.